What's up, everyone? It's just me and Corey today. Here on the big break, coming to you on this beautiful Sunday morning here, May 21st. Corey, how you doing this morning?
Feeling pretty good. Feeling good.
Love to hear, love to hear. Yeah, just a shame. Ethan's on his yearly car trip with the boys. That they take around this time every year, where they go through like basically the Midwest, or not the Midwest, but like the East, kind of like the mid East side of the United States. They go down like through the Carolinas, up through Tennessee and the Appalachians, which is cool. And Drew just couldn't be with us, so Corey, thanks for coming on here this morning. We're gonna talk a little CFP, something you and I talk about kind of a lot. Um, we're moving, Corey. 2024 was officially announced. We are going to be having the 12 team playoff that they just voted to expand to start.
Mhm.
With the 14 playoff coming at the ending at the end of this year, I just wanted to go over what was the good, the bad, the ugly, in your opinion, of the 14 playoff, and we'll talk about that here.
So first off, I'll start with the good. The good thing about the playoff was it was different. You didn't have the BCS. You didn't have, oh, it's these two teams. You basically had the start of, okay, you realize there's probably more than two teams that could win a national title. They expanded it to four teams, and those four teams just basically played each other. And to me, the good of that was change. It's always good to have a little bit of change. There was a lot of controversy. There still is controversy, but there
Uh,
was less controversy with the playoff than with the
ex-
BCS.
exactly. I was gonna say that. When you were mentioning that, I was gonna say there was controversy, but there was a lot less controversy than we had during that. What was it, 12, or what was it? Almost a 20-year run at the BCS. I think the BCS what came in
Something around there.
1998.
Yeah, something around there.
Yeah. So, and we had a lot of controversy in the BCS, but you're right. The college football playoff did eliminate a lot of that. Go ahead with the rest of your good.
The the other thing I think that was good was it wasn't just a computer ranking
Hmm.
that got the four teams. It was actually a committee of people that watched college football, that watched the games, that watched everything and how those played out. And I would say, almost every time they got the four best teams.
Absolutely, I would typically agree with that. I think there was a couple years I don't think they got the four best teams in. But I feel like you nailed it right there. At the majority of the past, what, this is our 10th playoff. The majority, I would
Yeah, I
say,
believe
yeah,
so.
like the 10th, 14th playoff, I would say 80%, 8 out of those 10 years, they truly did get the best four teams.
Yeah, I think we're 9 years. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
I would say 7 or 8 years they got the best team.
yeah,
And the playoff is hard because obviously, like we used to talk about with the BCS, there's always going to be that third team that's left out. And as we saw multiple times, there was a fifth team that was left out that was potentially deserving. So there was always, like we said, there was always going to be controversy, and there will still be controversy when we move to the 12 team because there will be a 13th
13th team.
team that felt like they were deserving to be in
Well,
that
and it's
conversation.
just like, and to your point, it's just like when we're going through selection Sunday for March Madness, for the big tournament, there's that 70th team that's like, well, we got shafted. Like there's that
Always,
69th and 70th team that was like, well, we deserve to be in over that team. So
always.
you're always gonna have that. The one thing that, while we're on the good, speaking about that, the one thing I did like with the college football playoff committee, there was two things with the selection committee that I liked, or one thing I liked and one thing I didn't like, and they're kind of the same. I liked, like you said, I think it was good that we had actual people who are knowledgeable about college football who watch these games. And they're making those types of decisions of who's going to be your top four teams, right? The one thing I didn't like though was if your if a team from your conference was being discussed, right? So like you're the representative for the Big Ten core for the college football playoff. You're the Big Ten conference representative in those discussions. When it came to Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, you had to leave the room while the SEC, the Pac 12, the Big 12, the ACC, and maybe the non-football related people, because I believe Condoleezza Rice was a part of it one like in the inaugural year. Well, those people get to talk about your teams. So that's just the one thing I didn't like about the selection committee was that, and obviously it worked all ways, right? The SEC couldn't be in there talking about Alabama, Georgia, LSU. They couldn't talk about their conference teams, which is okay. But wouldn't you want those guys to be advocating for your conference instead of a Pac 12 guy who maybe saw Michigan play one time this year and goes, I don't know if they're the best, they're the top four teams?
I mean, and I think that goes back to the controversy, right?
Yeah.
You're always going to have controversy with that being, with that happening. I think the one thing I guess I would say for the committee standpoint that I didn't really like is they valued head to head very largely, it seemed, on a big scale thing. For instance, like Michigan and Ohio State played each other. The winner of that game, they automatically say, is better than that team, which is not always the case. For instance, we had years where you had Michigan State who won the Big Ten, and let's be honest,
They were not better than
they
Ohio
got
State that
lucky to
year.
beat Ohio State,
Yeah,
and they lost to Michigan in a very close game, but Michigan should have probably beaten them worse. So it
1000%.
was one of those, right, and it was just one of those things where it was like sometimes it seems like they got the four best teams. And when you say the four best teams, everybody from SEC country goes, "Oh, well, Alabama and Georgia deserve to be there every year." And you could, as much as you say that, you would like to say after the last couple of years of Michigan, you would like to be like, okay, well, Michigan and Ohio State should be there every year too. Then,
Then we might as well just
and
have
and
Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Michigan every year in the playoff.
and it's one of those things where it's like I always said it from the beginning that with that 14 playoff, you have Power Five conferences,
Five of them.
you have five, one from each conference or whoever those four teams are. You can't have multiple because, to be honest, we talk about this all the time. Why do you deserve to play for a national title if you didn't win your conference?
I agree.
And to me, that was one thing I think for me that the BCS the majority of the time did was it put okay, although this team may be better, they didn't win their conference and that hurt them.
Correct. And I
So
think
it
and I think we're and I just want to touch on that because my feeling was with the BCS, it felt like unless you were a part of the SEC, you had to go undefeated if you wanted to play for the BCS National Championship. And if you weren't undefeated, like if Ohio State or Michigan weren't undefeated, Wisconsin, Penn State, you had to almost have USC at one loss or two losses in the Pac 12. You had to have Oklahoma or Texas with two or more losses in the Big 12. And then, if I'm not mistaken, there's only two ACC schools to ever play for the BCS National Championship, and that was the U and Florida State. And Florida State did it in the last year the last in 2013 with Jameson Winston, and they were undefeated. They had to be undefeated to make that game. So the one thing I do like about the BCS, like you said though, was it put importance on winning your conference because you weren't going to get those computer points if you didn't win your conference to be able to jump some of these teams to get into that game.
Yeah, and I mean, outside of a few years from the BCS where you should have or had rematches, outside of a few years where you had teams from the same conference basically play each other, um, in the BCS, it just I like the playoff, and we will touch on it here in a couple of minutes here, but I really like the 12. I like the 12 team playoff.
Oh,
Now,
we're gonna talk about that.
and we're going to talk about that. But I think, if I'm looking at, let's say we looked at the good, now I look at, let's say, the bad of the
Yeah.
playoff, right? If I look at what's bad of the playoff, I would say what's bad for the playoff was that the SEC and Big 10 conferences are so much better than the other conferences that it puts a damper on who you can play and who you can put in those games. Because for
Absolutely.
instance,
You're not
last year,
wrong.
you look at Michigan and Ohio State, they were clearly teams, they were above and beyond better than most teams in the country.
Oh,
Georgia is in that same conference. Alabama was
look,
beatable last year, but
you
they were
have
still good.
you have in college football, to your point right here, Court, in college football, you have, I'm going to say, five programs that I could say five. I could legitimately name five programs that I would say are the above and beyond just better than everybody else in college football. Okay? I'm going to say, and I'll die on this hill right now. It's Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, and USC. Those are your five programs in college football that if you're going to put tier one, two, three, whatever, those five better be in tier one.
Yeah, I just it's just one of those things where, and it's not anything that the playoff committee could have
No,
done differently. So
no.
it's unfortunate that the bad is something that they really couldn't
Could,
help.
right.
It's just the way it was. Now, obviously, you had Clemson years that made the ACC and made them rise above and talk about the
But
ACC and had
but
them
the
be a part of it.
ACC
But
was Clemson.
100%. So it just, to me, that's one of the few bads. Like I said, I talked about how I thought it was great that we went to four teams. Now, to me, we've talked about this every single year. There potentially may be four or five teams that could win the national title, but when in realistic terms, there's usually only two or three. And
Correct.
if you don't get
Correct.
those two or three teams in the playoff, you're hurting yourself. As the playoff committee, you're hurting. And unfortunately, most times, the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, most times the teams that finished second in the Big Ten or second in the SEC didn't make the playoff and was deserving.
Absolutely. I would agree. I don't.
There were it's and what sucks is that they put so much emphasis on being a conference champion and just like they did with the BCS, they do it again with the playoff. And what that hurts is, for instance,
You hurt yourself when, and it's not a knock against this program because I think what this individual did at that program was phenomenal. But for instance, you hurt yourself really when you put Cincinnati in the playoff. In the four-team format, you hurt yourself when you did that. Because let's just be honest, and it was proven in that game against Alabama, they really didn't belong on the same field. And
I,
and no, but what I'm saying though is to your point though, I don't even know if Cincinnati would have been finished second in the Big Ten that year. You know
yeah,
what
I
I
mean
mean?
it's
So to your point, Corey, I think like when we're talking about that, I just think that when we're talking about where they hurt themselves, I think they hurt themselves in those types of situations where they put in a like Michigan State that year, that they got ramsacked by Alabama 35 to nothing. Okay, Ohio State was clearly the better team in the Big Ten that year. They were the, defending national champions, returned everybody. It's like you're going to really fault them for a monsoon rainstorm of a game where they lose on a last second field goal. Okay, whatever. But then, like, And then it's like, then you hurt yourself again in 2016, the next year, when you put Ohio State in there and they got ramsacked by Clemson. You know what I mean? And you had a better team. And I'll say this, 2016, Penn State had a better team than Ohio State did. And they were deserving to play in that 14 playoff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think to me, I think if I was in the committee or could change something about the committee, I would maybe winning your conference is certainly important. 100% it's important. But just because you're a conference champion doesn't necessarily mean you're the best team in your conference. And
No, well,
so,
no, no.
what
Best team in one of the four best teams in the country.
correct? One of the four best teams in the country.
Yes.
I mean, but even still, you might not be the best team in your conference. For instance, for instance, I personally think two
I mean,
years ago in 2022, Ohio State was the best team in the Big Ten. Now, they had to come to Michigan and they got dismantled by Michigan, and Ohio State was not able to play for a national title because they lost that game and had two losses. Unfortunate, right? But Ohio, you could make the argument that that year Ohio State was the best team in the Big Ten, even though they didn't win the Big Ten. And when you win the Big Ten, it almost is a guarantee. If you win the Big Ten, you're in the playoff. One, if you have a one loss and win the Big Ten, you're in the playoff.
right.
100%.
Absolutely.
And to your point about Cincinnati, I don't necessarily think it was a flaw against the tournament format. I think it's more of the fact that it was just they ranked Cincinnati high based on where they were at the end of the year prior, and everybody in front of them
Loss.
just lost.
Well, right.
And so you
And
and they didn't lose, so you couldn't. Now to your point, had Cincinnati had a tougher schedule, if they would have been undefeated in a tougher schedule, beating Notre Dame like they did, then beating, let's say, Illinois, beating Indiana, which they did beat Indiana, but you have to, if they would have played a Big Ten schedule, it would be hard for me to look at and say week after week after week, that team is undefeated. Not
well,
saying that
right.
they wouldn't have won 10 games, but I think it was for the playoff committee, it was just unfortunate that everybody lost. We would be having the
Well,
same thing even if they put Oklahoma State in, because Oklahoma
and
State wasn't deserving of that
well,
anyway.
no, no, no. And but I think the Cincinnati was I think Cincinnati was a victim of UFC hangover. Because I feel like
Or
it was
UCF.
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 Yes, yes, yes. Sorry, UCF. The UCF hangover from that, because they went undefeated, then they beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl or something. They beat an SEC team, a big SEC team in that
They beat
in a bowl.
Alabama.
Yeah,
They beat Alabama.
yeah, they beat Alabama in their bowl game, and they finished undefeated, and they were claiming to be co-national champions because they finished undefeated and they weren't invited to the playoff. So I feel like Cincinnati, when they finished undefeated, they were like, the committee was just like, well, we could put in an Oklahoma State, we could put in a two-loss Big Ten non-conference champion, or we could just do what the people want and put in this group of five team. And then it proved, when you're talking about these four best teams in the country, they're not, when you're talking Nick Saban with a national championship on the line, that's different than Nick Saban with a Sugar Bowl. Just a not a New Year's Six Bowl, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that the one of the bad things that the committee does is they look at past success.
Yes.
They look at past success, and to me, that's wrong. And that's to me, I put that as one of the bads because they look at past success. And yes, you could say Cincinnati, they played Georgia that year close the year before and rolled in, beat a top 10 Notre Dame team that Notre Dame was at the start of the year,
Year
even though they weren't top 10
10.
when Cincinnati
Cincinnati
played
play
them.
them.
It was they were a top 10 team coming in. So you had that rolled success. And I mean, you consider, I mean, Ohio State in the playoff last year. To me, that's rolled success because even though they didn't win their conference, yeah, they deserve to probably be there more than other teams. But if Ohio State hadn't had past success in the playoff, that's not even a conversation.
Um,
So so to me, it's well, and to me, I just think that past success, Ohio State had been there year after year after year. So that because they had been there year after year after year, Ohio State going into every season now is a top five team.
right,
You see it now with Michigan. Past success 2 years ago, last year. Although they didn't win playoff games, they're top five in the country this year because it's expected that they're going to be there. You look at every projection now, Michigan and Ohio State are both in the playoff next year
right,
because the committee hadn't done that before. They had done it with the SEC, but now that they have done it previously, it all of a sudden is something that's going to be something that's expected. And to me, that's not good. To
no.
me, it should be the playoff 1 year. Just because you're the reigning national champion, you deserve to be ranked number one. But just because you're the number one team in the country doesn't necessarily mean you are the best team for the playoff.
Well,
And so,
and this leads me to actually to a good point. Um, you just led me into a great point. And we talked about this extensively before, Court. I think the biggest ugly and the biggest stain on the entire college football playoff, it has been their rankings. And we've talked about it before. They start coming out with their rankings week 8. After week 8's completed, that Sunday you get your first college football playoff rankings, right? Why? You've now just left yourself to all of what you were just talking about. Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, Georgia, um, Clemson when they were, when they were ranked in the top 5, top 6 every single year. With, when the Deshaun Watsons, your Trevor Lawrence era. Then you had Oklahoma those couple years with Baker, they were ranked in the top like 8. You know what I mean? USC is now ranked because of past success and historic success. They're ranked in the top 5 every year with Caleb Williams right now. They set themselves up when coming out with those rankings at week 8 to basically say these are going to be your teams in the playoff. It was very rare, as we've seen, it has been very rare that a 2014 situation where Ohio State was ranked 12th makes their way into that, jumps 8 spots in 8 weeks. And the
yeah, I
committee,
mean, Michigan was unranked coming into the season, not even on the radar 2 years ago, and they were, I think, nine the first week of
the
college
college,
rankings, and then
yes,
they beat Penn State the week after. They beat Michigan State, and they beat Ohio State, and all
but
of a sudden they jump right in.
well, right, but you're talking about you're still ranked in the top 10 in those first weeks, and then
Yeah.
like we talked about, when you do that, then that's when you leave. Well, we won all of our games since those rankings came out. How did this team jump us? Because all we've done was win, and you kind of lose yourself within the rankings, and then it's like we talked about last year. You had Georgia at 1, or Tennessee at 1. Georgia beats Tennessee. They become the number 1 team. Okay, fair. I get that. But I think Michigan may have had the best win of college football last year. How are they not the number 1 team in the country?
Yeah, and I mean they to me the rankings the way they rank them, I always thought that they set themselves up for failure by coming out in week 8. I always thought you're no matter what, you're always going to have controversy. But you know how to have less controversy? Release the rankings one time when on selection day, just like you do for March Madness. They do one day, they release them, there's controversy, and then the games start and everybody forgets about it. So
Yep.
it's one of those things because every single year you are adding pressure to the committee and adding extra pressure to these teams to basically put up a fight every single year to be there. Now, obviously, most teams want to play for a national title. But let's say, for instance, let's take this upcoming year with Colorado and Deion Sanders. Okay. They don't have Colorado was really bad for a long time.
Yes.
I get the feeling that if Colorado is a one-loss Big 12 champion, just because of who their coach is,
Oh, they're
they
in.
will be in. They're in. And to me, that's not a problem for me. But what I have a problem with is if you watch them over that whole 13-week period and you feel that they are one of the four best teams, I'm fine with it. But don't just put them in because of Deion
Deion
Sanders.
Sanders. Right.
Don't put Michigan in because of Jim Harbaugh. Don't put Georgia in because of Kirby Smart.
Don't put
If
Ohio
they are, if
State
they
in
go on
because of their offense.
grind, if they are
Right.
undefeated and deserving, just because you go undefeated, to your point, does not mean that you are deserving.
Agreed.
It should, to be honest, strength of schedule is important. However, to that point of strength of schedule,
I think you should also take into consideration when teams are playing each other as well.
and how you win. How you win. Yeah, okay, let's talk about it for a second. Michigan played UConn. UConn was ranked what, dead last
Yes.
going into the season last year? Okay. But when Michigan played UConn, they beat them 55-3. Now you'll say, okay, they should beat them. You're absolutely right. But how come when Georgia or a Florida plays Tennessee State, they win 28-21, barely squeak by, but that's still considered a better win. I just
Well,
the
or
way the
and
committee
Alabama
does
gets
things.
credit for playing the Citadel the week before Auburn, blows them out
Right,
63-3.
right,
That's a good win. That's a
right,
phenomenal win for Alabama. But when Ohio State or
right,
Michigan does that in the Big Ten,
right.
it's well, that's expected.
Well, and the other thing is I go when the
I get what you're
BCS was
saying.
around, the first couple of weeks, everybody played a tune-up game
Yeah,
outside of a few like big games that they had set up,
the
right?
Chick-fil-A
So
kickoff and those
right,
those
right.
things. Yeah, yeah.
So my thing is you allow them to split their schedule basically in half to play a team, and then they play a tune-up game right before they play a rivalry game, right? And in the meantime, the Big Ten, Michigan is playing Michigan State and Penn State to finish the year, and Ohio State is doing the same.
And
So,
then we're playing each other.
correct. So, my thing is, and it kind of what hurts the Big Ten in this case is that these teams aren't good. It's Michigan and Ohio State are the cream of the crop, and everybody else is a cornfield.
Yep,
That's outside of they
you're
don't
right.
have sustained success.
You're
And
right.
that's what hurts because when you look at it, Florida, yeah, Florida's not normally very good, but they were good. They had good years. They still get a lot of talent. You have, Alabama is always good. Georgia is always good. These smaller teams are better than what the Big Ten has. So to me, bringing in USC and UCLA is going to equal that out because you're basically when you have an undefeated team,
You're
you're gonna
not just
it's gonna
saying
be
it was
it's not
Ohio State or Michigan beating each other
right.
at the end of the year. It
Exactly.
goes down to that one
And
game.
and I, and I
And
think that bad goes back to what teams the committee has to choose from.
correct.
And I also think there's too much outside noise from them putting the rankings out that sometimes they allow fan bases to kind of push where they should be.
Correct. And I think and you mentioned the one way to combat all of this was you come out with the rankings at the end of just the one rankings. Here's your top teams. Here's your playoff teams. Here's your New Year's Six Bowl teams. Here's everybody think. That's one way to combat that. I think the only other way to do so would be to just come out with a college football playoff ranking from week 1 all the way through. And essentially what you would be doing that at that point which would be unfortunate for the history of this poll, would be you'd be eliminating the AP poll. Essentially, if you did week one all the way through, you're eliminating the AP poll because in reality that the AP poll doesn't matter. It does because it gives you an outlook of potentially what the committee would be looking at, what teams are they're looking at, but at the end of the day, it's still that group of people who they decide who are the best four teams at this point, for this final
Right.
year. And I think
Well,
that's the only way
go
you
ahead.
combat that. They either tell you where they're at from week one all the way through, or like you said, Core, you don't do anything until the last week and you say, here's your playoff and here's everybody.
And and that's not to say that the committee's not going to meet every week.
Oh, they probably do.
You just don't put a ranking out. And to
Yeah.
me, I think it's a moot point anyway as we
Oh,
move
moved
on
on. Right,
to
exactly.
the 12 team, because I think as we move on to the 12 team, it's really a moot point. Doesn't matter.
Well,
Because now the ranking is, now it's not about I have to be 4. Now it's
now it's
I
I have
have
to
to be
be in the
12.
12. I have to at minimum be 12. And it's a great point because let's talk about what potentially could this 12 team playoff bring, right? We're going from 4 teams to expanding it all the way up to 12. We're adding 8 more teams in the playoff, right? My fear with this is we're going to get some really bad teams. And it's almost going to prove that a 8 team or 4 team playoff format would actually be better. I think 12 is way too many, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there's not 12 teams that deserve to win a national title. There's
No.
not 100%.
Well,
But what I think they're going for is the word is chaos.
oh, they want chaos.
They're going for chaos,
But
because now you see teams that maybe you overlook, don't deserve to be in it because they have 2 losses, end up squeaking in at the 12, going on the road to play a team and beat them, and all of a sudden they're in the national title game when
right,
no one expected them to be.
exactly. Well,
The
but what I was going to say though is on top of that, what I think is just going to happen is and like well, it's what these talking heads on ESPN were saying last year during this selection process, right? You had talking heads on there saying how 11-1 Ohio State doesn't deserve to play in the 4 team playoff. Keep in mind, they said that they don't deserve 11-1 Ohio State does not deserve to play in the 4 team playoff because they didn't play in their conference championship game. Not win it, but didn't play in it. Now, they were advocating for like um USC who lost theirs, or and some of it and another team who lost their conference championship because they were in their conference championship game. And then they turn around and say, "Well, we need a 12-team playoff." What the hell are you talking about? If you don't think 11-1 Ohio State deserves to be one of the best 4 teams in the country, why the hell do you think a 10-2 or 9-3 LSU team deserves to be deserves to play for a national championship? That's the logic behind all this, from what like all these people talk about year and year and year and year out of the 4 team playoff, of all these teams not of that 5th or 6th team not deserving it as a 1 loss team, but then you're going to sit here and tell us that we need a 12-team playoff to allow a 3 loss team to be in there? Like this,
yeah, I
the logic doesn't make any flippant sense to me.
well, to me, I think the main thing that the 12 team does is it takes the fun out of the rivalry games. It takes the fun out of it, because let's be honest, Michigan and Ohio State are both undefeated.
We're both
Going into
in.
that game, you're both in. And yeah,
Dog,
okay, yeah, you want to win. Yeah, you want to win a Big Ten championship. Same goes for Alabama, Auburn. Georgia. If
LSU,
you
you
make
all
it,
want to win those, but
it feels like if you make your conference championship game or are 1 loss behind it, you're in.
Yeah,
And what that's
let's
going to do is it's going to screw over those little guys that you expect to be in the in the tournament end up not, because you're going to end up having 3 or 4 teams from the Big Ten, 3 or 4 teams from the SEC,
right
and then
there.
a few others sprinkled in.
Absolutely. And like you said, like if you're Michigan and going into next year because we get USC and UCLA. If you're Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and now Penn State, I would put Penn State into this conversation in the Big Ten. If you all have one loss and your one loss or two losses are just beating up on each other, I have a hard time not believing that those four teams would not be in the 12-team playoff. It'd
I think
be
it just depends on what happens with everybody
everybody
else, but
else.
it'd be very hard to not imagine that
You'd,
all four make it.
right. And and I think that's a problem. Because like you just said, for Ohio State, Michigan, if you're both undefeated going into that Saturday after Thanksgiving, you want to beat your rival because it's your rival. You know what I mean? But on the national landscape of college football, that game went from being this to being this.
Right. I mean, obviously, you're still going to have the fan bases and everything
Right.
go at it, obviously, but
The
it takes a little sizzle out of it.
the
Takes a little
national.
sizzle out of them. Yep. And I mean, the other thing I would say is, if I were doing it, it would be something like, again, we go back to, you didn't play for your conference championship, you don't deserve to play for a national title. So maybe instead of like getting rid of in conference championship games, you basically say, okay, these are the two teams that were going to play each other for the conference champion. That's who gets to move on to go play for a national title. Regardless of if it's deserving or not, they were playing for a conference champion. They deserve to play for a national title. And I mean, I think there's going to be, what's going to be really interesting is to see that first year, because
Yes.
that first year is going to tell you an awful lot about it, because you're going to have teams like Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, Georgia,
Georgia, LSU.
who start in the top 5, and they could lose 3 games. But if you think about it, if Michigan, let's say, is a top 5 team and loses the first 3 games of the year, all of a sudden nobody talks about them, and you say, oh, they're not deserving of playing for a national title. But if they win 9 in a row, and in those 9 wins, USC, Ohio State, Penn State, and those are your 3 teams that you feel are in, does Michigan, because they beat all 3 of those teams, deserve to be in with 3 losses?
That's You're
It's
going to
it's
have a
it's
controversy and discussions with that because there's a
it's
lot
it's just
potentially that could
it's
happen.
well, and is that 3 loss Michigan team more deserving than 2 loss Oklahoma State out of the Big 12, who finished runner up?
Right.
Or they, like, it basically means your losses don't matter. It's about who you beat, is what I think it's going to be, because you're
And
going to have too many teams and
well,
too
and how
much
do you
star power.
decide? Well, right, and how do you decide like where these I see what I envision happening is I envision the five I envision your Power 5 conference champions are auto bids in. And I feel like depending on the records of those teams, those are going to be your ranked 1 through 5 teams. And I'm going to be honest, this is most likely how those rankings will go depending on your record as a conference champion. I think no matter what, if every 5 conference champion has a one loss, the SEC is the number 1 seed. I think that's going to be a guarantee almost every single year. I think the Big Ten, if you're undefeated and the SEC's undefeated, or the Big Ten has a one-loss conference champion, they're going to be the number 2. The Big 12 is going to be the number 3, and then the Pac-12 would be the 4, and the ACC champ will be the 5 as the
Yeah,
weakest conference.
yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but again, seeding doesn't matter. You just want to be the higher seed, so you host
Well,
the game.
well, you want to be that higher seed so that way you host because if I'm not mistaken,
But you only host the first round.
yeah,
It's
you
only hosted in the first round, and then it goes to the other bowls sites. But I think, to me, I'm just
so
it's what I'm afraid of. If you're talking about what are you afraid of, what I'm afraid of is you're going to have basically people just lay goose eggs at the end of the year.
yep,
Oh, okay, we don't have to play our starting running back against Ohio State or against Alabama. We don't have to play them in that conference championship game. We don't have to do that because we're in, for instance, let's say Ohio State goes undefeated, whatever, right?
right,
Your star wide receiver and star quarterback are nursing injuries, right? They,
right.
if it was a big game they had to
You
win, they
basically,
play, they're gonna sit because you're in automatically.
yeah, and
Even if you don't win your Big Ten conference championship, you're
you're
still in.
still in, and to your point, Court, I'm looking at it here now. You want to it depends on, and we've talked about this with the new format, and you're bringing it up now, is it almost depends on your personal preference, right? Do you want to be ranked 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 so you get that first bye? Or would you rather be 5, 6, 7, 8, play that first playoff game at home, have another game under your belt before you go test the waters against Georgia's, your Ohio State's, your Michigan's, your Alabama's, your USC's?
I mean, I'm for playing. I don't like the buys. I mean, I know sometimes the buys are helpful and can do good things. After a
Right.
loss, having a buy makes you want to get it more, be hungrier, whatever. But I'm also, you talk about momentum. You could argue last year that when Michigan went into Ohio State, that's the best win in college football. And then they went in and played a tough Purdue team who had some talent around that with draft picks,
Right.
and they beat them pretty good. If Michigan would have played that following week after the Big Ten championship game, I'm not sure they would have lost to anybody that was on that field in front of them. They were playing as good a football as anybody with, and they didn't even have potentially their best player.
Correct.
So
So
I mean, so it's one of those things where it's like you said, it's a hard argument. Yeah, you want
but
the buy and you want to be, the tire seed, but like you're you're on upset alert to one of those four teams who get a buy that second week when they have to play. Every single one of those teams is on upset alert because they're a week shot. They're playing 1 week of less football.
10 days. 10 days, almost.
Right. And
So,
what happens is teams find a groove. And if you find that groove at the end of the year and you are playing well, you play in the game. You play in the
yes.
next week game. All of a sudden, that team, now we can have a whole nother argument about these college kids playing 18 football games. We can have a whole nother argument about that, about how these teams are going to end up playing what, 17 games, 18 games,
So right now you're 13
13,
and
and
0,
then you have
and then you have
another
your
4 wins to win a
no,
national title.
no. Well, so yeah, so you would have one or potentially one, two, three, 4 games. So you're looking at 16 to 17 games is what you're looking at minimum. Because you would have
That's a
your
lot.
because if you're if you're 5 through 12 ranked to the 12 team, you play the first round. Then you would have the quarterfinals, semifinals, championship. But if you're 1 through 4, you get that auto buy into the quarters, which then only leaves you with 3 games left in the season, which is still, I mean, it's still a lot. But I was just looking here. You kind of do almost want that. You don't want that long layoff. Um, the Big Ten championship for 2024 core is going to be played December 7th. Okay. Your first round, and these are going to be home on campus games, right? for the first round of the playoff will be Friday, December 20th, and then Saturday, December 21st of 2024. So you're literally looking at a 2 week layoff and then you're back on the field. Compared to the quarterfinals, which could be up to almost 25 days, you're going to be looking at.
Yeah, you're like a whole nother 10 days, a whole nother
Yeah,
week and a half.
yeah, you're really like a week and a half away. So it's almost do you want
I
that
think it just I think it just depends. I think it just depends. And it's going to be for the first time in a long time. Coaching matters in a 12-team format. Coaching is going to win a national title
you still have to have the
unless
talent. You still
a
have to have the
hundred percent,
talent, but
a
I agree.
hundred percent.
I
But
think your
coaching and
preparation.
the way you make adjustments to that team in only a week to 10-day mark is really going to show who the cream of the crop is.
Oh, absolutely, because we've talked about it plenty of times throughout. For you guys listening, Corey and I have known each other our entire lives, literally our entire lives. So we've had conversations, Corey, I've known for throughout the years where we've always said you don't give Urban Meyer a month to prepare for a team. You don't give Nick Saban time to prepare for a team. You didn't give Jim Tressel time to prepare for a team. You didn't give Lloyd Carr time. There's certain coaches where, like Ryan Day almost, Dabo Sweeney, you have, Kirby Smart now in in that thing. I want to see Harbaugh win a New Year's Six bowl before I can really push him into that upper echelon. But there's certain coaches where we've talked about you just don't give these guys that much time to prepare for one team to play one game because they're gonna win it.
And while I agree with you in that sense, that's not always for us. For instance, a smaller school, right? A smaller school in the Big 12. While you would never give them a shot against Alabama, although Alabama had that 25 days off, we talk about this all the time. We talk about the coin toss, how important the coin toss is. Let's
Right.
say that small school wins the coin toss, goes down and scores a touchdown, and gets Alabama on the ropes right in the first quarter.
You're not wrong.
Yes, some coaches are just built differently and they know how to do it and they can
Right.
get it done. But a lot of those coaches also have the best talent more so than anybody else.
Oh, you're absolutely not wrong. You're definitely not wrong in that aspect of things either, and I totally agree with you. But what I was saying though is to your point, you are putting more importance on coaching because now you're not going to have a month to prepare for one team.
Oh,
You have to watch what these teams do week 1 and now you're preparing for the winner of that game. You're really preparing for two teams in
well,
your
and to me,
preparation. And
and
how
to
do you
me, the whole thing.
go
Go
ahead?
ahead.
Well, I was
No,
going to
I was
say
gonna say.
how do
Go
you
ahead.
prepare for that during your prep for that quarterfinal game if you're 1 through 4? How are you preparing for a potential matchup against a Michigan or a off year USC team who lost 2 games? You know what I'm
Well,
saying?
yeah. Well, I mean, to me, I think it's coaching throughout the whole year. It's getting the most out of your talent at the best time, and I mean,
Yes.
it comes down to it.
Peaking.
I mean, like you, yeah, and I mean, like you think about it, you have to, and people who aren't familiar with major rivalry games, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, every single one of those teams holds plays back until that game. They save plays for that. So when I say coaching, I'm saying you're going to have
Yeah.
guys that are practicing plays every single week, and they aren't going to run that play until January. You're going to have those teams
Yes.
that are going to save that play for one specific circumstance when they need a
Oh,
play at the most important time. You're going to see them run that play. And it's going, that's when I say that, I just think when that coaching, the coaching, when you run a trick play, yeah, it looks fancy and everything like that. But what everyone doesn't know is they've been practicing that play
since
since the
August.
summer, since
Since
the
August.
summer,
Yeah, since
right?
August.
And so to me, it's when coaching, it's not just about learning those plays, it's to dial it up at the very exact moment that's going to basically give you the upper hand.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point, never saw Ohio State all year long last year run a fake punt. Never did. There were plenty of opportunities they should have. They saved that fake punt for Georgia. Unfortunately, there was 12 men on the field for Ohio State, but they got the first down that they were looking for in that situation. And that key drive that they, like you were talking about, Core, they saved that play for January. They could have ran that against, but they didn't want to expose what they could do on that side because they felt we need this play for January. And to your point, that is something that is going to be happening a lot more. Boise State did it against Oklahoma with the hook and ladder, and then following it up with the Statue of Liberty play. I didn't see those at all during their season, but they put those out there when they needed it the most in a big game.
Well, and to your point, I think that those games, the Boise State, Oklahoma games, those are the games that the 12-team playoff is seeking.
Yep.
Those are the games where a team should be 4 touchdown underdogs and somehow take them to overtime and it's anybody's game.
Okay. Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's it's just it's just and I think that's what they're going for because you see what happens in March Madness and how these teams just 16 seeds beat 1 seeds, 15 seeds beat 2 seeds. It's wild,
Yeah.
right? And so what they're
They
hoping
want that
is
kind
they're
of
hoping
chaos.
100%. And you want a team like, let's say,
And
UConn. You want a team like
yes,
UConn who joins a crap conference who just is somehow undefeated and sneaks in as the 12
12 and
and
maybe upsets a couple teams.
they end up playing Georgia in the semifinal and upset them.
Right. Absolutely. I do agree with that, and I think what they're really looking for too, and it does the logic kind of makes sense when you look at it when you look at it in that aspect core was I think you're looking at these what they want is they want more variety in your national champions. I mean, let's just be honest, like let's look at the past teams. Your first college football playoff national champion was Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Alabama, Clemson again, Alabama, Georgia,
Alabama.
Georgia,
You're right.
or Alabama and then Georgia, Georgia.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or no, no, sorry, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Georgia. Those are your
Yeah,
nine
it makes you
teams in
it just
order.
it just right. It just makes you think that like what I'm very curious to see and kind of my last note that I had here about it is
Yep.
just kind of you know at the beginning of the year who's going to be a national title contender. Okay. And so, yes, while there will be upsets, you are probably guaranteed that of the 4 teams, 3 or 4 teams that you feel are probably a national title contender, I'm pretty confident saying that one of those 4 teams, 3 teams is playing for a national title just because they're that much better than the other teams.
Yeah. I and the only thing I worry about this 12-team playoff because I agree with that point. I'm just gonna leave my last note here on what I fear. I almost feel that you're gonna get a less. You're just gonna. It's really this 12-team playoff is almost gonna narrow it down to 4 teams still.
And
And
as much as we want teams to have rematches with games and stuff like that, they're
it's
gonna
not
avoid
good
it.
for, yeah, it's and like let's be honest, it's almost not good for the sport. I think the only time you could really have a rematch is Ohio State, and we're using these analogies because we're in the Big Ten, but you have Ohio State and Michigan on the same side, right? Let's say Ohio State or Michigan plays USC that year. They beat they beat USC, but they meet USC in the Big Ten championship game. USC beats Ohio State or Michigan. So now you have 1-1. I think the only time you could possibly see a rematch in like the first round is if you go give them the trilogy this season. You know what I mean? Let's see who really is better out of these two teams to move on.
But I still don't think they'll do that. It would be
Eh,
something in like the semifinals.
yeah, or the
They would end up
quarters,
in the
or the
yep,
quarters. They'll set it up
yep,
that way because, and I
yep.
don't think you'll ever get a rematch in the first round. Um, what I'm excited to see finally is the potential of a Florida, FSU, the U, Auburn, LSU, the potential for one of those teams to come up to Ann Arbor, Columbus, or Happy Valley in December, in the middle of December, and play us.
And you just hope that that happens. I mean,
I
I
hope
hope
it does, but I don't think it ever
I
will.
hope that Michigan and Alabama or Michigan and Georgia just aren't that good one year and end up playing in a first round. And Georgia has to come in the snow in December of Ann Arbor. You just hope that those things happen, but in the back of our minds, we deep down know
No, it will
that the
never happen.
solid five teams are going to be in every single year, and they're going to have buys and playing at home.
Now, Core, my last question here for you, and we'll end our show on this because we're getting close to an hour. Wow. Um, my question for you is: do you think, on average, how many teams in the 12-team playoff, how many of those 12 spots are taken up by Big Ten teams on a year-to-year average basis? When you incorporate UCLA and USC into the Big Ten.
I would say probably comfortably three. I would say you're probably
Yes.
guaranteed two,
Yes.
probably three. Most years you might get three. Some years you might get four on occasion. I think it just depend. Again, it's going to depend on who is
What the
good from
schedule is
other
like.
conferences. Well, how many teams? If the Big 12 everybody beats up on each other and everybody has three losses, they're only getting one team
Team
in.
in. Right.
If you have the SEC and everybody beats on each other and there's only three teams, they get three teams in. So you're gonna have to. It's gonna be where it's gonna be, and then you're gonna also have to factor in probably of those 12 teams, Notre Dame will be there every year. So,
Most likely, yes. So they're going to be
so
one of those 12. So
r-
you really have
right,
11 open spots when you talk
right.
of when
So
you
when you think about it, 11 spots over five conferences with the amount of teams that are in these conferences now, you're looking at three is probably a good year.
absolutely. I can see on average, I think the Big Ten gets three in every year. And I think that's going to be a combination of the teams we've mentioned out of the Big Ten: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, now with Luke Fickell, and USC, and maybe UCLA with Chip Kelly out there doing his thing. I think those are going to be your main teams coming out of the Big Ten and to the 12-team playoff. Um, Next week, hopefully we are all back, core with Drew and Ethan. I kind of want to drop this. We're gonna talk about next week a big thing that happened that kind of got swept under the rug that wasn't major news that actually happened January 1st of this year. It went into effect. The NBC, Fox, and CBS have all signed a again, let me say that again, 7 billion, but B with a Bravo billion-dollar TV contract with the Big Ten that is supposedly, from the article I read, averaging 80 to $100 million a year, Corey. 80 to 100 million a year for each program inside the Big Ten. So we're gonna talk about that next week. We're also gonna talk about the potentials that could, you know, that could happen. Not Big Ten, but it could affect the Big Ten. There is rumors of the ACC disbanding. There has been a few major programs out of the ACC, football and basketball both, that have reached out to the Big Ten and interest in joining. So we'll talk about a lot about that next week. So don't miss that next week. Core, anything else here for us that you have?
Nope.
Nope. Just again, guys, like and subscribe to the video. We appreciate every single one of you that came by this morning and watched. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Once we do hit that 100 subscribers, we'll announce more about that giveaway. So, everybody, just take care. Have a wonderful Sunday, and we'll see you next week. Peace.